Today, down in the comments, I want to know who is your favorite horror director that you don't think gets enough credit. Hey everyone, I'm Adam Cesare. This is Project Black T-Shirt, the channel where we take a new release horror movie or a new release horror Blu-ray and then pair it with a book recommendation that you might like if you like that movie. I know we talk about Arrow Video a good bit on this channel, but there's good reason for that because Arrow Video rocks. And this month we're going to be looking at everything they kind of released for the month of May, which is 2 separate releases, but there's 4 movies altogether. So we've got a lot to talk about, so let's get to it. First, we'll talk about the standalone release. This is Death Smiles on a Murderer, directed by Joe D'Amato, with Klaus Kinski and Uwe Allen. This newly commissioned cover art by Arrow Video kind of has a real giallo feel to it, and then you got Klaus Kinski here maybe holding up what looks like a Reanimator agent from Stuart Gordon's Reanimator. And that's actually not false advertising. There is a corpse reanimation subplot. This is set in early 1900s Austria. It's an Italian horror film set in Austria, so it's got a kind of a period gothic vibe to it, but not strictly the gothic castles you're used to. And like a lot of giallo films, it does function on dream logic. The plot does function on dream logic. It is a mystery, but there is a supernatural element to it that kind of throws the whole mystery part out the window, because even as the detective towards the end of the movie is starting to piece things together, he's like, oh, this doesn't make any sense. And he's right, it doesn't. But it has this really hallucinatory, really cool quality to it. And D'Amato actually put his real name on it, not his often used pseudonym, even though he had a bunch of pseudonyms. That kind of gives you an indicator of how he felt the quality of this film stacked up with his other work. If you're familiar with his work, you might be like, oh, it's not the director for me. If you're unfamiliar with his work, Death Smiles on a Murderer is really D'Amato putting his best foot forward, and a slightly less sleazy foot, even though it is kind of sleazy, than a lot of his other work. In the early 1970s, Michio Yamamoto directed 3 films. They're a loose trilogy. They're referred to as the Bloodthirsty Trilogy or his Dracula Trilogy. They are Japanese studio Toho that made Godzilla, is very famous for Godzilla, put these out in the early 1970s, and they are kind of inspired by Western horror movies. They're kind of inspired by the Hammer horror movies and the Universal kind of gothic horrors, but they are uniquely Japanese. I think that's kind of underselling them to call them just like, oh, they're the Japanese versions of Hammer, because there's a lot of stuff in these movies that's completely localized to Japan, even though there's a ton of other elements. You even have characters talking about how Western some of these vampire elements are. The movies in order are The Vampire Doll, Lake of Dracula, and Evil of Dracula. Now, The Vampire Doll, starting out the trilogy, is kind of the most straightforward. It has, people arriving at a cold, dark night to a kind of Western-style mansion castle in the Japanese countryside, much like Dracula. It does depart from that later on, and there is kind of a very Japanese kind of folklorish story about what created the vampire, or even if there is a vampire, if it's someone under hypnosis. So Vampire Doll, most straightforward of them all. Lake of Dracula, probably my least favorite of the 3, because it feels the least gothic. It doesn't really capitalize on its vampire roots, even though there's a kind of cool looking vampire, very heavy stage makeup, almost like Tobe Hooper's version of the vampire in Salem's Lot. But Lake of Dracula there is a lake and there are vampires at the lake. None of them is exactly named Dracula, although there's hints that like the vampire might be a descendant from a Western person who might have been Dracula. And then my favorite of the 3 is the series capper, Evil of Dracula. Now, Evil of Dracula is different from the other 2 because it has more of a youth bend to it, because it's about a teacher traveling out to northern Japan, kind of the rural area, secluded area of northern Japan, to be a teacher, to be a psychology teacher at an all-girls school. He meets the kind of recently bereaved principal whose wife has died in a car crash like 5 days before he gets there, and he's told that, oh, actually you're the psychology teacher and you're going to be groomed to be the new principal. Strange things start happening at the school. Girls start getting attacked. There's a kind of A plot, B plot structure of like We're following the adults, we're following the kids as they get attacked. It's a lot more, it feels a lot more lively and a lot more modern. And as with all these films, there are incredible set pieces. Yamamoto like puts these movies together kind of impeccably well, and they have this kind of very nice widescreen classical style to them. Like the camera pushes in, and we have these really nice compositions, and there are these little artistic flourishes done with like camera and lighting tricks and like some light animation in some points. They're really, really, really interesting. I'm not going to say, as with Death Smiles on a Murder, I'm not going to say that both of these are must-own Blu-rays, but if I'm talking to you about these and you're like, oh, that sounds up my alley because I really like Italian horror, or that sounds up my alley because I love Japanese horror and I want to see little scene Western-inspired Japanese horror movies, that you can't go wrong with either of these, especially if you're a fan of the horror from the countries they come from, they hail from. But am I going to tell everyone to run out and grab these? No, they're not. They're maybe not going to be a modern audience's cup of tea because they are a little bit more metered, a little bit more artistically lensed, and kind of langoriously paced. Even though all of these films are under 90 minutes, I believe. I know everything on here ranges from like 70 to 80 minutes, and then yeah, 89 minutes. So these are quick movies. As far as features go, on Death Smiles and a Murder, the best feature, there's a little quick archival interview with D'Amato. It's like 5 minutes where he talks about, you know, putting his real name on the movie and how he likes it. That's nice, but the best thing is the Smiling on the Taboo, which is a video essay by Kat Ellinger. It's really like a career retrospective of D'Amato. It's really well done, really well edited. And then in the Bloodthirsty Trilogy, kind of less features on these. There's no commentary or anything, but there is, Kim Newman does talk about the movies and kind of places them in the context of Japanese horror as a whole. It's a nice little piece, but for these, you're really buying them for the movies themselves, and the transfers look awesome, and Arrow, as always, does like an incredible job, you know, consigning new artwork for these. All right, this week's book recommendation is from my friend Patrick Lacey. He has a new novel out called Bonesaw, which is a kind of meta-horror slasher look at a director gone wrong who is setting things up to have people killed spectacularly on camera with this pig face, this slasher, this kind of original slasher. It's a strange, funny, gory mishmash of a book, and I think you'll really enjoy it. Especially if you've read Pat in the past, if you read Patrick Lacey's work in the past, or if you read any of my work and kind of enjoy it. Definitely lives in the same wheelhouse. I'm Adam Cesare. This has been Project Black T-shirt. If you like this video, please hit like. If you really like this video, please consider subscribing and checking out the rest of my videos. If you want to find out more about me or my work, you can join my mailing list, and I'll send you a free couple short stories, some sample chapters from my novels. I write novels, short stories, comic books. Hope you have a great week, and I'll see you next Friday.